Okay, so thank you all for joining us for this session on the Stony Run. My name is Anand Pandian. I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology here at Hopkins, and it has been a tremendous pleasure for me not only to live and work alongside the Stony Run for the last 15 or so years, but also to have the chance to work with stewards of our local environment, engaged public citizens who care a lot about the stream and the larger watershed, which it's part, Jones Falls, which you're probably all aware of, but also more specifically, leaders, community leaders of the Friends of Stony Run, several of whom are going to be on this panel with me this afternoon, from whom we're going to be hearing, I believe, about larger and more longstanding stewardship efforts with regard to this stream that runs alongside our campus, but also with regard to more specific management planning process for the lower Stony Run that we'll be talking to you a bit about and sharing with you, and hopefully getting some feedback as this is itself an evolving plan. So we are scheduled for over an hour, and so we've got plenty of time to not only share with you, but also to get your own feedback and to have conversation. So what I'm going to do as moderator is to just kind of pay attention to the conversation and get us all engaged as much as possible. But I'm also here on the program as the first of the presenters that we have on the program for today, and so in that capacity, what I want to do very quickly is just introduce you to just give you a brief sense of what it was like for me as a professor at Hopkins to try to make the Stony Run the focus of teaching, the focus of student engagement that I had the chance to do over the course of the 2019-2020 academic year, when I pursued a year-long collaboration with the Friends of Stony Run. James Wolfe being one of the people that I had the chance to collaborate with, or others as well who were involved with the organization at the time, as part of a Center for Social Concern course in engaged learning. So every week, beginning that fall of 2019, we had students wandering around the street, walking around, exploring the landscape, exploring not just the stream itself, but also the larger landscape of the watershed of the stream. And it was amazing. We were thinking about all kinds of things. And in fact, when Tom talks in a second, he will share with you all some of the work, as part of what he shared, some of the work that the class did over the course of that year. We got involved in a number of different projects that had to do with specific forms of stewardship and future planning with regard to the stream. But what I really want to get to very quickly is the fact that this happened in 2019 to 2020. And we're really gearing up that year, that spring of 2020, to put all of these engaged, on the ground, collaborative projects into motion. And of course, as we all know, the pandemic hit, right? And not only did it, not only did it throw all of our lives into disarray, but it also meant that we couldn't see each other, right? And so we had to stop teaching in person. We couldn't even, in those early months, if we recall, we couldn't even engage with each other in person. And so one thing I pivoted to doing over the course of that semester is actually just, we were wandering around together in person as a way of trying to kind of connect as a campus community with the stream and the landscape. Because we couldn't do that anymore, I started carrying a camera around and connecting with students via Zoom from different parts of the stream. And what I actually want to do is just play a short video of it's me on pretty much the last class of the semester in the spring of 2020, trying this whole year to help bring attention back to the stream, help bring attention back to this buried water system that we're constantly walking over, paying no heed to, trying to kind of bring those connections into focus, but finding that difficult in ever so many ways. And then there was the pandemic that made us feel all the more distant. So this is a day that it was pouring rain, the river was in spate, and it's just a short recording of me talking to the class.
Where is this located on Stony?
It's where the stream goes underground. and through a tunnel and eventually meets the Jones Falls.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
It's about 29 degrees.
okay, I just trying to,
Yeah, and I'll show in my presentation, I'll have some maps, so I can.
okay, yeah, I'm just trying to get us.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna play a few minutes of this, and I hope this works. Can I? I'm not even able to see the play button.
It looks like.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a way of doing the kind of work we're doing in this class, like entertaining the kinds of possibilities we've been entertaining through a class like this, with projects like ours, if we weren't committed to the importance of that outside. We weren't committed to the importance of what could happen even when it's pouring, even when circumstances are so unpredictable that they land us in flood. And there's something still about the value of being outside, about the awareness that wherever we are, we're connected to something bigger. All of that is what is at stake in the kind of work that we're doing. And there are circumstances in which I think it's very difficult to hang on to that and to embrace that, to value that, even to kind of take it seriously as a possibility when things are rushing along with as much insanity as they are. But we have to find our way there somehow, I kind of feel. And this book, I think, perhaps one invitation to try to figure out how that might happen. These little exercises that we're doing and we're planning, another way to think about that, these little experiments that my advocates have been taking this camera or my phone out and about, this landscape that we're trying to maintain some connection to. That's another way of wrestling with all this. I don't know. I think that to me, in my mind, there's so much that's interesting in this book that we just read together. One of the interesting features has to do with the relationship between language and the world. And the extent to which there are things that are at times metaphors, but at other times are just sort of descriptions of a reality that can't be expressed in any other way. And in my mind, being in a place like this, thinking about this rushing water, thinking about that tunnel, where that water might go, all of that to take as a kind of metaphor, to take it instead as an embodiment of where we are, what we're struggling with, what we're wrestling with a class like ours, with the kind of exploration that we're doing. So, I don't know. I kind of just wanted to bring us here for that reason, to share some of these thoughts here, rather than being a level that I've been living in the most of these last 2 weeks, because it felt like the right thing to do. I don't know how effectively you taught these circumstances, or I can talk these circumstances, try for dividends, then maybe I'll take shelter.
So the reason that I thought I would share this is because to me, this moment, it's trying to convey obviously via video, but you know, it was pouring. The stream was in spades. I was trying somehow to connect with my class from that environment, knowing full well that they were all in their own individual bubbles, right? And I'd be going back to one myself. It just felt to me like a radicalization of the circumstance that we're already in, right? Here we are in a room. It's a room in a larger building, right? Container within container. But if you think about it from another standpoint, we're still in the Stony Run. Right? We're still in that watershed. Like we're still part of that water system. Whether we notice it or not, whether we pay attention to it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, that stream is running through us, it's running through our environment. We are in it and we are of it. And I think that the challenge that we face is one of figuring out ways of bringing that reality home to people in an urban environment, in the midst of a watershed that's been mostly buried, in the midst of all of these other circumstances and ways in which the environment is always tucked away in a way that we can't quite notice, can't quite acknowledge, can't quite pay attention to. Right. So to me, the challenge of the pandemic really speaks to a larger challenge that we continue to face that has to do with really learning how to turn toward the environmental resources, systems, structures that make our lives possible, and to find ways of building that kind of awareness and building that kind of connection into the tissue and texture of what we do as educators, as public citizens, as residents of a city like this one. Welcome, Sandy. So I just want to leave you with that thought as an opening invitation to thinking through the work of this particular panel. So with that, how's it going? Thank you for joining us. We have several folks from the Friends of Stony Run. On the one hand, there's Sandy Sparks and James Wolf, who are leadership positions with the Friends of Stony Run. We have Tom McGilloway from the landscape architecture firm Mahan, who has been centrally involved in a management planning effort around the present and future of this stream. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk about this process, and then we'll hear from Sandy and James at the time. We'll talk about that.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anand. Good afternoon. So, like Anand, I also live near the Stony Run. This is my playground, and the past couple of years developing a strategic plan. It's also been a work project, and I've been a volunteer with Friends of Stony Run, probably even before Friends of Stony Run existed. Tree planting, tree cleanups for the past 20 years, the period that I loved here. So I want to hit some highlights of the strategic plan. And really, one thing I want to emphasize in Wyman Park, which is within the Stony Run, is probably the only large park in the city of Baltimore that never had any kind of master planning effort done to it, except for back in 1906 when the Olmsted brothers did a plan for it. So this was really a great opportunity to not only document past efforts that have been going on and current efforts, but also to plan a framework for future projects and stewardship efforts in the Stony Run. There's been a lot of efforts and projects either run by the city or volunteer groups, and this is important that everyone works from the same page, because that not always happens when there's no plan to follow. So as Anand mentioned, we're in this room, we're part of the Stony Run. The Stony Run is within the Jones Falls water. It's in its own watershed, and within the Jones Falls watershed, then the larger Chesapeake Bay watershed. So it really impacts the whole city. What happens in this watershed impacts the harbor and the Chesapeake Bay. So we were looking at primarily the recommendations of Stony Run itself, but also some broader watershed-wide recommendations and citywide recommendations. And looking at the Stony Run in the context of sustainability, since this symposium is sustainability, it's important to recognize the three pillars of sustainability: the environmental, social, and economic. And I think a lot of times we primarily focus on the environmental aspect, but the social and economic are very important as well, especially in an urban environment where a lot of people are living. Parks have a tremendous economic value on cities and communities. They have a tremendous social value, as Nan mentioned, during the pandemic, the connecting with each other in the park, and then obviously the environmental benefit that they have. Now, this is the simplest of sustainability diagrams. There's many complex layers to this and where the items overlap, but I just wanted to highlight the social and economic. From a social standpoint, during the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time out here, obviously a lot of people, students, faculty, neighbors spent a lot of time in the Stony Run. It got more usage than we've ever seen before. It became an important refuge. It became a connector, not only for people to each other, but people to their environment and people to different communities. And then from an economic standpoint, this, many neighborhoods and this institution surround the Stony Run, and a healthy, viable park system adds economic value to the neighborhood around here. It preserves the neighborhood economics. So I wanted to, for an overview today, touch on these 5 aspects of historic context, the outreach and engagement we did, some themes that guided the recommendations, connectivity and accessibility, and then implementation. So look at the historic context. This is, I believe, from 1929. The Wyman Park Dell is in the foreground, Hopkins Campus is in the middle, and you see the Stony Run, that wooded corridor running along the edge. But if you notice here that there's the old Mahan Railroad running along the base of that slope. That slope is an unnatural slope. The Hopkins side is a natural slope. That side is a lot of fill and spoil from other projects in the city. It was filled in there to develop some housing. As a result, we really don't have a real healthy forest along that edge. There was debris. This was back in the day when projects were done and there was no forestation efforts done with it. The Mahan Railroad went through there. That's now the corridor for the Stony Run Walking Path. So this theme of connections, happen not only just a waterways connection and a watershed connection, but history of a transportation corridor, and now as a recreational corridor. Even in the 1903 Olmsted Brother plans for the city of Baltimore, they identified that the green were existing parks at the time, and the orange were recommended park corridors that started to connect. So that you see the Stony Run, Wyman Park is in green, and then the Stony Run is a much longer corridor to connect. You see the networks of the Herring Run to the right, the Jones Falls corridor in the center, and the Gwynns Falls corridor to the left. So early on, the city was looking at how connections can be made above park spaces. And the Olmsted Brothers even developed a plan that's never been realized for Wyman Park and the Stony Run. And if we drop it into today's context, and then compare it to today's, what the condition is, it's still, we're very fortunate that we have this primarily wooded corridor in this park space still intact, even though some of the recommendations of the early 1906 plan were never implemented. As part of the process for Stony Run, we did a lot of outreach. We had a number of steering committee meetings with engaged partners, the university, neighborhood representatives, city agencies. We had community public meetings, did site walks, a survey, community meetings, and so forth. And just a couple highlights from the we had an incredible response rate to the survey. 378 people responded. 33% of those had some kind of affiliation with Hopkins. Either they worked here, they were students, or they had some kind of a business association with Hopkins. So Hopkins is a very important part of this corridor. And the diagram on the right was in response to some questions about the right balance of active and passive uses. Most people, 80%, felt that the mix that's there now of active and passive is the right mix. So that was an important foundation for our planning to go forward, that we want to preserve the mix that's there, not add a lot of active recreation, but also not remove it. In terms of activities that were important, walking, nature appreciation were all very important to people. And when we look at this word cloud, trails, walking, green areas, maintenance, invasives, all really rose to the top of the issues that were important to people. So they guided the series of recommendations that fall within these many themes. I'll go through each of these real quickly. So additional studies and data collection, like any planning effort, there's limited resources. Our focus was the Stony Run corridor itself, and to provide a plan for volunteers and other city agencies moving forward. There's a lot of studies we couldn't do, but are important to be done. So part of the plan identifies some of these other studies as recommendations that could be done in the future. We've also looked beyond the Stony Run and recognizing again that the Stony Run is part of this broader watershed, several watersheds that impact the Chesapeake Bay and Baltimore City, and how this ties into other planning efforts having in the city, the Green Network Plan, and other planning efforts for the city. Anand mentioned that part of the buried stream, the lower part of the Stony Run where it meets the Jones Falls is actually buried under the Sisson Street Department of Public Works waste facility. You could see the dash line, the approximate boundary of the Stony Run, and that leads up to that culvert that Anand showed in his photograph. And so part of the plan, looking at, even though we had no control of the properties that are highlighted in orange, these properties will likely see some change in the future. So what the plan does is recommend, as those properties change, how can that change better engage with the Stony Run better from an ecological standpoint, from an activation standpoint, from a connecting to the Stony Run? So how can any change to those parcels help improve the Stony Run as it exists today? And then also putting guidelines for homeowners associations, institutions, and businesses in the watershed, things that they can do. The Stony Run's at the bottom of the watershed. That's the collection point for all the water. So what happens in the upper hills, planting of trees, capturing rainwater, all help impact the Stony Run. And just an example of some things that Hopkins have done over the years with the Wyman Park streetscape improvement, the stormwater, the rain garden collection, the green infrastructure along that roadway helps to filtrate that water before it gets to the Stony Run. So just the examples of things that people can do within the watershed outside of the corridor. Anand talked a lot about bringing attention to this corridor to people. And so park awareness and increased awareness was a big part of this. At a very basic level, and improving signage. A lot of people think this is just leftover green space in the city, don't even realize it's a park. So putting signage in to announce that it's a park and provide wayfinding. These are some exhibits from Anand's social ecology class, mapping some of the ghost streams as they connect to the Stony Run. And the ghost stream meaning they've been buried or culverted over the years. So when you're in Sherwood Gardens over the Guilford neighborhood, there's a stream that runs under there that's been buried. And so interpretive signage showing how, what happens in that neighborhood does influence the water quality and the Stony Run itself. In this class also on the left developed some signage, showing how the history, cultural history, and other history and timelines for the Stony Run. So a lot of efforts, as I mentioned earlier, this master plan builds on things that have already been done. So Anand's work and other work of others in the community have informed a lot of the recommendations. It's not just a plan to look forward, it's a combination of documenting those efforts and going forward. Ecological recommendations, Hopkins students as well as neighborhood and Friends of Stony Run have been involved over the years in stream cleanups. James, you'll hear from, has been involved heavily in invasive removal and planting with native vegetation. This plan documents current areas where that work's being done, as well as future work that could be done. Open spaces. This is very important. I think sometimes overlooked. And when I talked about social, the 3 pillars of sustainability, a lot of times, again, our focus is on environmental. And we've had several groups over the years that wanted to take a lot of these open spaces and reforest them. And while that would have an ecological and environmental benefit, it would really be a disservice to the social aspect of the neighborhood. These open spaces are very important meeting spaces for students, for neighborhoods, for community groups, informal gathering. This is where people connect with each other. So as looking at sustainability, we need to balance some of the environmental with the social and economic aspects as well. And then the plan documents all these open spaces that need to be protected and reinforced. And then connections, very important, the physical connections, but also the human connections. And I want to delve into this in a little more detail. Not only having the connections, but accessibility. This park, if we look at the broader scale, how much this park connects to. We have the commercial districts of Hamden, Remington, Charles Village. We have several other parks, the Wyman Park Dell, Centennial Park to the north, Roosevelt Park, Druid Hill. So, with a couple minor improvements in this system, we really connect to a much broader network of green spaces, open spaces that not only provide, environmental corridors, but physical connections and recreational corridors. We have a lot of different ways that the neighborhoods and the campus connects to the trail, some rugged trails, some wonderful boardwalks and steps and pathways that add a rich experience to the park. But there's a very limited accessibility. That north of University Parkway, there's a section of the path that's accessible, but nothing south of the University Parkway has any accessible pathways. Even along the roadway edge, there's just dirt paths. So if anyone that has mobility issues wants to experience the park, they're really on the other side of the street, on the sidewalks, having to cross multiple streets to get along there. So a recommendation is to work with the Department of Transportation to incorporate some pathways. The orange represent ones that are at the upper plateaus near the neighborhoods, creating some accessible loops and access points. The green represent the section of the Stony Run Walking Path that could be made accessible. And then much of the Jones Falls Trail at the bottom of this diagram is accessible. So connecting these points. And a really big part is connecting from the lower Stony Run Path to 36th Street on the bottom. And there's just quite a little bit of a hurdle above those ponds that have been installed. There's a steep slope. So looking at how a switchback could be put in place to make that connection. And we heard from the survey, a lot of folks from Hopkins about the importance of connecting from the Homewood campus over to Hamden. It's a route a lot of students use, a lot of people at Hopkins use. So improving that connectivity. And some examples from the Jones Falls Trail, how that can be done sensitively on these steep trails and through wooded areas to make that connection. And then at the southern end, connecting the Stony Run with the Jones Falls Trail, there's a very short section that's not connected, so making that connection. So those were some highlight themes. There's a lot of recommendations in the plan. Implementing is going to be the key to this moving forward. Partnerships are a key to implementation. This isn't just this is not the city's Rec and Parks job to implement everything. It's not Friends of Stony Run's job. We have partners. Hopkins has a role to play. The neighborhoods and different associations have a role to play. We've partnered with Flowering Tree Walk in Baltimore for a major tree planting at the southern end of the park. Hopkins has a current lease on a portion of the park that was established in 1986. At the time, Hopkins was going to build a building and parking garage in the park, and there was a big uproar. So the Wyoming Park Community Association, Hopkins, and the city came together with an agreement to put a lease around this part of the property that Hopkins would have access to intramural fields, but there would be no building built there. With this plan and the plan, which is a partnership with Hopkins, one of the recommendations is to renegotiate that lease because it's 40 years old now. It's a 100-year lease. The conditions have changed, so we have a chance to renegotiate it, look to the future, and have a lease that works better for Hopkins, for the neighborhood, and for the city as a whole. So that's just one example of a partnership. And one of those projects is to improve that pedestrian bridge. If you come down from the campus to the intramural fields, there's a bridge that's not in great connection, and then making that connection to the fields and that lease area more accessible. And that's one of 5 projects, capital projects, that we received $1.5 million in funding for that we can immediately improve as proceed with implementation. Sandy Sparks will talk a little bit about that. She's the founder of the Friends of Stony Run, and she'll talk about some of this funding and the importance of an organization like the Friends of Stony Run. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here, and we have a great team. And Tom is fantastic in what he's been able to lay out for the strategic plan for the lower Stony Run, which begins at Ridgewood Road. And he actually, I don't know if he mentioned, he actually did the upper Stony Run for several years ago. So we're tying those two together. This plan, we've had a steering committee working on this since summer 2 years ago. And the steering committee involves stakeholders from the community, from Hopkins, from the various city agencies like DPW, DOT, Rec and Parks that are involved. I'm very pleased to say that Hopkins is the major funder for this report, this sustainability program, which was created to enable us to get that 1.5 million from the state last year. And for that, we must thank Delegate Maggie McIntosh. So on her way out is our delegate. She got that funding. So we have 5 projects within the plan, and they will. The first one that'll kick off, which really has the most work already in place, is the Lakewood Road Walking Path. Tuscany Canterbury neighborhood has been working on that for over 2 years, and so they have a very detailed plan and that worked with the neighbors on the details. Very excited about that. It's a very awkward situation because the stream is tight against the road. The road isn't that wide. We have a real log jam. It's not a log jam, it's a people jam going on there. And then the second gateway is off of Tudor Arms Road to go down to the stream. It looks like an easy access. It's a roadway. It's currently paved with some very heavy stone, and it's used for entry by maintenance trucks, not primarily, but we want to make it welcoming and have a gate to prevent illegal use of the drive, and also to set it back so that it's a great staging area for projects that we maintain. The JHU access is the bridge. How many of you have been across the way into Stony Run, into the park? Okay, so some of you haven't. Well, that's exactly why we've done this plan, because here's this fabulous green asset laying right up against the Hopkins campus, and we really want everyone to enjoy it. It's a fabulous little place to go for a walk or whatever. So anyway, the bridge crossing the Stony Run there is very old. It's derelict. It looks terrible. It's not unsafe, but it's ugly, and it's not really accessible the way it's sitting now. So we will replace it with a drop-in pedestrian bridge that's like those two above it by University Parkway. That was actually part of our very first state capital projects, also thanks to Ray. Then we have the big southern connection, which I'm very excited about, especially because it's really held back the idea that the lower Stony Run is accessible, and so people will now be able to walk the length of the path. And yet we're currently at dives where the stream goes underground in the tunnel, and we need to get people safely up a very steep slope to Wyndham Park Drive to be able to continue walking along the playing fields there by Greenmount School and across in front of the Boy Scouts over to connect to the Jones Falls Trail and Druid Hill Park. Druid Hill Park is a great asset that people need to be able to go over to easily. And the last of these 5 is signage. Signage is terribly important. We have very little signage at this point within Stony Run. And actually that will apply both to the upper and the lower reaches of the Stony Run. And part of that will be interpretive signs, so that when you walk along the path, you'll be able to understand the ecology, the history, whatever. It makes it appealing to have an easy way to learn about the Stony Run. So I'm chairing the committee of the Friends of Stony Run that will see the implementation through for this. And I wholeheartedly encourage you to get involved with our friends group. We have cleanups and various projects, and so we're meant to. Our purpose is to attract as many people as possible to come to the park year round and enjoy it. Thank you.
The final presenter on the panel is Jason.
Are you talking the same slides you're doing the different? Do you have the same slides or are you talking from different?
Hey everybody, I'm James Wolf. I'm presently the president of the Friends of Stony Run. I'm also a neighbor, and I'm a Master of Environmental Science. Got my degree here at Hopkins in 2011, which I'm very proud of, and it's served me very well. I'm here today to talk about sort of improvement on another front that I'm involved with. I'm here to talk about local efforts in fostering sustainable ecosystems here. Talk about how these efforts have informed the strategic plan and how the strategic plan includes elements to support and to further these efforts. And I'll try to communicate what I see as vast opportunities for meaningful engagement and connection with the earth and with each other here as we learn to find ways to build a sustainable ecosystem here across the city and hopefully even beyond. Just for, let's see. How's this work? Okay.
Yeah, just use the arrow on the.
Okay, just a bedrock term here, habitat restoration ecology, biodiversity, these things are all sort of together. This is what we're after. The practice of renewing and restoring degraded, damaged, or destroyed ecosystems and habitats in the environment by active human interruption and action. I'm gonna have to dispense with this excerpt I wanted to read, but I really want to pump this book. I love it. It's by Dr. Doug Calamy of University of Delaware. It's a bestseller. It's really great read, really nice prose, and it really expertly threads the needle between urgency and optimism. I'll read a little something from that later, but not the main thing I had planned in the interest of time, unfortunately. But anyway, to give a picture of where we are in 2023, the original forest was clear cut, even the secondary forests now been clear cut. Along the Stony Run, there's been mills, a railroad, a cable car line. There's been lots of disturbances for sewage conveyances and DPW restoration projects. I'll touch on one of those. So the movement of all these materials and the attendant disturbances have left us with a really degraded ecosystem here. And unfortunately, there's no way back to where we came from. So we need to find another way forward. But very fortunately, this is a really interesting and enlightening time to be so close to a university and all these schools and, enlighten, environmental people, because the knowledge base for ecological restoration is really flowering and building now. But we know it involves removing some of the aggressive, non-productive vegetation. This picture just goes to show, that at one point there wasn't much to work with, but there are tons of native plants and things in the seed bed, and the path forward is being forged, and it's clear in many ways. I'd like our efforts mainly for this are mainly grassroots through the Friends of Stony Run, when Sandy started in 2011. We have a network of stewards along all reaches of the stream that report problems and things. We've done all big to small projects that, involving, capital funding and getting resources, Sandy mentioned. And then we operate with a committee structure. I won't get into that whole thing, but now we're I'm focusing on engaging more people, more institutions in the watershed, and more young people through social media and stuff. I see this as Anand sort of touched on this, and I was involved in a course that I'll touch on. We talked about bioregionalism, which is a sense of place, that we're all connected to this place that we are, especially in this sort of fractious time when people are so many other places electronically and whatnot. It seems like a very fundamental way for a connection. So we think that the Friends of Stony Run is a great way to do that. It's mostly grassroots, but I do want to mention this very quickly. This project from 2017 of the DPW is very pertinent to Hopkins and us. It was a massive disturbance and orientation. That way is North University Parkway or San Martin Drive. Massive disturbance happened in the Stony Run right between Wyman Park and on Homewood. Here's the Olmsted Bridge. There was disturbance there. These are engineers, they're not environmentalists. So the delivery was very poor, especially the vegetation was put in July. But through my advocacy and other folks, we got an audience with the city. And they did on the back end to repair work. They got many hundreds of native plants which they put in. And one of the city's first IVM integrated vegetation management contracts for 2 years. There's 1 year remaining. I saw trucks down there today. They're treating aggressively a lot of the place, even on Hopkins campus. They're spraying herbicides and things. In a year, they're going to walk away. So this is going to be up to Hopkins on their side and us to make good on all this good work that's been done, because they are going to walk away unequivocally. Anyway, there's a lot of opportunity there, but we need to do some partnerships. Okay, back to the more of the grassroots. The city Department of Rec and Parks has empowered community groups and citizens in a number of ways, because they have resources that they don't have the personnel to mobilize, but they have these training programs. The tree keepers and the weed warriors are free certification programs for residents. They're incredibly empowering. The tree keepers teaches people how to plant, care for, and prune trees. And the weed warriors program teaches people how to identify and remove invasive species. Once certified, you get a card where you're allowed to do this work on your own in public property. They are aggressively empowering friends groups like the Friends of Stony Run and other groups with a quarterly Parks and Play grant where they'll help you pull off a project up to $5,000, giving you up to $5,000 every quarter. And they have workshops to share all these things together, to share all these things with the friends groups to help them be better stewards and do the projects that they do. So my focus is on the weed warriors. Tom touched on some of that. We have all these problems with invasive species. I and some other weed warriors have started a monthly meetup. On the third Saturday, we have a regular work event. This has allowed us to be intentional, to be systematic about our work, and to revisit areas and get continued success. This is a patch of paper mulberry. This is after it's been removed. This is a couple of years ago. It's still gone. This remains in this condition. We work with the city. They allow us to, with tree keepers, to plant native trees in the place, and then native plants also. We favor the native plants that are there. We're getting lots of success in different areas. This is the 39th Street restoration area, which was dubbed this in the strategic plan. This is all porcelain berry. This is about 5 years ago before I got started when I came to the neighborhood. The next picture is, you'll see this conifer there. If you're standing at the base of it, facing towards the camera in this picture. This is what we did in a couple hours, a couple people. All that porcelain berry was stripped to bare ground, and now you can see there's a stream there. Here's another event we had in November. Subsequent to that, after we had another event to pull the roots of the porcelain berry involving the outdoor club here at Hopkins. We had boys from frat that came up. We just aggressively pull roots. We can't use power tools or herbicides. And then we spread a native ecotype seed mix to establish a wet meadow in this area where it was completely lost to invasive species 5 years ago. And there's a lot of native trees planted among there also. The way the strategic plan helps these, it identifies areas of extensive invasive ground cover, priority areas. It identifies other NGOs that are working in the same space and community engagement approaches. So we have a great roadmap with this strategic plan. And also identifies native species to be planted as we go, to go forward after the removal. And very importantly, it gets involvement and sign off on these things, a partnership with BCR, PW, and DOT. So we're now all in this together, and it just presents an amazing roadmap. So more locally at Homewood, they have a beautiful forest here. The mature beech forest, but it's being beleaguered. It's beleaguered on sort of all sides by all these, and really think the time to act is now. First of all, one of the things I'd recommend is to invite the students. And this is the only design entrance into the park as viewed from the ROTC barracks, which is a spot that's not frequented by students to begin with. And then once you go in, this is a very treacherous path to go down to that pedestrian bridge. It's not very inviting. In my involvement as a co-instructor in a course, and I've also led a couple classes in tours through the park to try to spread this message through some professors that I've come to know about this. I found out that even upperclassmen are unaware of this completely. Most of them are not aware of this gem that they have at Hopkins. So first of all, the students need to be invited into this resource. One of the classes, they had a final pitch project. This was just going to show one of the groups, they identified the need for more signage and more inviting, and they identified safety issues. I'd submit that just by dint of having a treacherous entry that's hidden, that may make it more inviting and feel more safe just by doing that area there too. But there are security concerns too among the students. Almost done, a few more slides. Here are weeds around campus. There's the Carnegie building. Here's a tree that's being killed by porcelain berry. This is along San Martin Drive where you can't see into the forest at all. This is all blanket based. Joining our efforts, folding these problems into pedagogy with students, using as a living lab, finding success can enable. You can use it in local labs. I don't know if that one too. It's using the campus for learning. Campus has a laboratory. There's a greenhouse. It seems that I look in there, there's nothing going on there. It'd be a perfect place to take native seeds for restoration purposes. And then the students and faculty can make a tangible difference. Before and after photos, something they can have that they've done, they can live with. And then they gain skills that can go everywhere. I mean, this could be sort of, this can build and it can be exported too. It's very, very exciting to me. So here's a placard on campus to show, the splendor of Wyman Park, if you can only see it through the porcelain berry. Here to the book. There's simply too many of us on Earth to sustain our cumulative impact. A neutral impact is not good enough either. We no longer have the option of leaving things in their current degraded state. We must now act collectively to put our ecosystems back together again. So to connect to our efforts, anybody could join the Friends of Stony Run through our website. If anybody's here, teachers or faculty, incorporate the strategic plan, Friends of Stony Run, and these principles into coursework and activity. Encourage, follow us on social media. Attend a Weed Warrior event. You can start in your own backyard. Sandy asked me to invite everybody. Please come on April 20th to our annual meeting. It will be in the Space Telescope building.
Yes.
Anand will be the guest speaker. It's a beautiful building. It'll be a nice night. Hope everyone will come. Or please bend my ear or email me now at jamesdwolf@gmail.com to start a conversation there. Thank you very much.
So, we have plenty of time now for discussion. I wonder if we could go straight to questions. I also have a couple of questions I might pose to the panelists to encourage, to sort of kick that off. If you folks are open to that, what do we? Should we
Maybe let's start.
Yes, specific question. When they talk about the south access, is that the path on the west side of the street that in many places is single path, and there's a lot of places where you have to step over roots?
That's it.
Yeah, that's the main Stony Run Walking
Oh,
Path.
okay.
Yes.
Is that going to be opened up to at least, let's say, make it so it's 48-inch clearance, so people with minor mobility issues can go on.
That's at the southern end, that's a real challenge because of the grades and the hillside. So where we were looking, it's really from that connection I showed up to 36th Street, from that point down and then northward all the way up to beyond like Northern Parkway is the part that could be accessible with a wider trail and mobility. So that lower section will be kept as a more of a walking path and somewhat in a rugged state. Now, there are planned recommendations of plan to look at selectively remove obstructions like rocks, roots, and make it a better walking path. But to widen it is very challenging.
Okay, I tried a recumbent correction.
Yeah.
And it's basically single for bicycling, it's single track.
Yeah.
Assuming you remove the barrier.
Well, may I add? The intention all along, predating the formation of the Friends of Stony Run. Thanks to Ann Perkins, who was a former delegate, and several people who lived along the stream, and I live in Charles Village. To create this as a walking path, to not make it into a bicycle path, because that changes the whole feel for it. The rules for a bicycle path are, it'd have to be paved and all that. We don't want that. The idea is to maintain it as a accessible walking path. And the strategic plan's goal is to make it as much as possible handicapped accessible. So it's not gonna have a hard surface.
Well, I didn't require a hard surface. I was looking for 46, 48, 30, 40-inch accessibility, which would be required for handicapped accessibility.
Yeah, that lower section where the slopes are the steepest, that would be hard to achieve, but the idea is to make the surface smoother there and make as many sections as we can wider and more accessible. Yes.
Two questions and comment. First, excellent work. It's so good to see the Friends of Stony Run. I think these are for standing. I'm not sure. First one is the accessible path from JH down to the footbridge. That'll be an accessible path, so it will have what do you call it, where they go around?
Well,
around?
it's
Second, you want them all at once, or you want to?
I'll answer the question. That is on Hopkins property. So it will be up to Hopkins.
So that wasn't in the budget there.
No,
You showed.
no,
The bridge,
is.
is separate process.
The bridge.
But we did now that path coming down. Ideally, if that could be made accessible, the intent was it was more of a, it's called JHU access. Like more of an inviting, make that a better, it might have steps in it, make it a better steep pathway. If the money and funding's there to make it accessible, that would be great. Yeah, that would be up to Hopkins.
Second was the Linkwood path. That'll be on the west side of the stream then, instead of where the road is.
Yeah, it'll be along that.
Across the
There's
road.
not a,
No,
you mean the Linkwood?
Yeah,
Talking about,
that'll be next to the Carlisle there.
no, it would be part of the road,
Part of the road.
what the Tuscany Canterbury neighborhood is looking at is removing the on-street parking and then shifting the lanes over, so that far left lane would be a.
That's why it costs so much.
Sidewalk.
I see, yeah. And the comment was the signage. So our Wyman Park Community Association, I think, put pressure on these Odette from the city council, and people came out from the city to put signage about dogs should be on leash. Well, within a few days, people have taken down the sign. So it's a continual problem, and people love that place to have dogs off leash. And yet the statute is they have to be on leash, so.
dogs are
Yeah.
Tom's favorite topic.
Can anybody do that?
I've been assured the signs will be anchored in a way that they're not.
But
I didn't get into that part of this because that could be a whole symposium in
Yeah.
itself. That was probably the only issue in this whole planning process that has had some contention, and we run into that in every park we run into. And so we didn't solve it with this plan because it has so many, it impacts the leash laws and all this stuff. But what we did do is we identified optional areas where there could be a fenced dog park. Or a designated off leash areas.
So stay tuned, please.
That could be pursued further. So we gave a roadmap so that as parties want to pursue this further, they have a framework to work from. And they don't have to start from scratch.
Thank you.
But
yeah, and I must say the budget for signage is not for dog signs.
Right.
Okay.
and the other thing about the dog, it is a very balancing act because you have the population that doesn't want the dogs and you have the population that do want to have off. There is an economic value. You have the dog walkers add eyes on the park at early morning hours and evening hours that provide some security. It's attractive if you want residents to stay in the city and attract residents to the city, having a place for dogs is important. So that's one of the things that we identified as a citywide issue, that there really needs to be a citywide issue looking at how they can get dog parks or off leash areas into all of the parks or in all the neighborhoods looked at holistically. Because every park, you have people that want to say, well, don't put it in this park, put it in the other park, and then over there, we'll put it in that park. So it has to be looked at.
Thank you.
I was interested, is your organization at all invested in monitoring the quality of water? And in other words, being in contact with the ones who does influence water?
We work with Blue Water Baltimore. So that's their wheelhouse. We don't pretend to have, we do some measuring, but it's only volunteer. We have no expertise. That's really Blue Water, which is citywide, actually region-wide, that they have. We're very fortunate to have them. In fact, I began my work in the Stony Run back in the 90s when I was executive director at Greater Homewood, and we created the Jones Falls Watershed Association. And that then became Blue Water Baltimore citywide, and that left me saying, oh, we've got to have a Friends of Stony Run. And now we also have a Friends of the Jones Falls.
So I'd actually jump in on that theme, actually. I wonder if you folks might comment on this. I mean, it's wonderful to have you here where you're from the community, you're from the neighborhoods that surround the campus. And I feel like it's a real opportunity for us within the university to be thinking about our place in the larger city. We're often accustomed to thinking of that in purely social terms, right? We think of different human communities in the city, but of course, we share the environment, we share the landscape, right? As I was trying to gesture toward earlier. And as we saw from some of the images that Tom shared in particular, we know now, right? We've established that the Stony Run is a tributary stream system called the Jones Falls, even pointed, I believe you, Sandy, had pointed to a place where, the stream goes underground, and so that actual connection it's invisible. Given that organizing in the city now is at the level, or environmental organizing is at the level of, it's almost organized in a scalar level. We have friends associations like the Friends of Stony Run that are interested in this particular stream, but then also, as you said, the Friends of Jones Falls, thinking about that larger landscape. How would you encourage those of us at Hopkins to be thinking about the larger watershed that the Stony Run is part of? Is there anything that you would like us, that you would like to see? I feel like we're on the verge of large challenge.
Well, actually, I'm happy to say that the Friends of the Jones Falls, which I formed in 2018, so we're really relatively new. We have some board members who are from Hopkins, like Matt Thomas, who runs or who's part of
The 21st century city.
yeah, 21st century city. So he, I think that's a very, very strong connection. And we had very proud of our first conference that we had last fall, in which we invited a number of people from Hopkins participated. So absolutely, we need that link. I've been around long enough to know back in the day, Hopkins really turned its back on the Stony Run. It didn't really want, it discouraged people from going, students from going over there. And now I feel like we've made a 180-degree turn, and it's just a great place for Hopkins affiliates to go over and enjoy it. And then also testimony to that is that they very eagerly funded this Lower Stony Run strategic plan.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on that, yeah, I think it's a bit, from when I moved to the neighborhood almost 30 years ago, it's a very different mindset that, Hopkins is really embracing the larger community at many different levels. And I think to your point of getting more awareness, making more people aware, students, faculty, workers here of this amenity here, the more you have people using something, the more you have champions. And just in, to go back to the water quality question that you had, there's several neighbors, I'm in the Wyman Park neighborhood, there's several neighbors there that were very diligent about reporting if there was a sewer leak or a sewer break, reporting it to Blue Water Vault or DPW, getting that addressed. So the more you have people that using this on a daily basis, you have more eyes on it and eyes to report those issues. And agencies are more apt to do, and institutions are more apt to do something if there's pressure, continued pressure to, hey, we have this resource, let's do something about it.
If I could just jump in, tag another question onto that, but then direct it to James in particular. So we're an institution, of course, in the city. We have a big footprint, we occupy a certain space in the city, but this is also a center for learning and research. And I wonder, with regard to that, like if we think about, say, the needs of the watershed, the needs of the stream system, like the needs of the landscape from that restoration standpoint you were speaking of. There are practical challenges here, there are management challenges here. There may also be like basic questions, knowledge questions. I'll just give an example. I walked across the street this morning too, right, to get to campus, because we mostly live in the same couple of blocks,
Same
actually.
blocks.
But
They really are neighbors.
But I walked past the folks who were spraying. I stopped for a moment to talk to the woman from the agency, the public agency. She was actually pouring some of the herbicide to begin to spray. I was curious, I asked her what kind of herbicide she was using, and she said it was a glyphosate. And I know that, and it's related to Roundup, therefore. I have all these questions around Roundup, and I just, as I was walking up to campus, I don't know, just this question was on my mind. Could we imagine a future where we had researchers on campus available to address questions around best practices, when it came to the use of chemicals, when it comes to the ecology of the forest, when it comes to questions like water quality? What asks might you have, right? As the president of the Friends of Stony Run, as someone who's sort of concerned about these ecological issues, how could or should we be contributing our knowledge, our learning, our research to some of these bedrock problems?
Thank you for asking. Having some sort of, having maybe the Earth planetary science wrap themselves around the park. I mean, maybe having some sort of naturalist, the groundskeeping crew, they've done some, I noticed that they've fought some invasives, but they're, they have the resources that they have, but they, focus mainly on the campus and, the evergreen up there. I think to find a mix between it being the faculty, the groundskeeping staff, it seems like it might be a little difficult to find out where they could sort of seed sort of projects to the Earth and planetary sciences or to student groups that might come to be interested in this work if they were exposed to it. I think that would be a really viable path forward if you could sort of figure those things out. It is sort of a steep slope. So there are sort of issues with removing things and stability issues, none that couldn't be sort of solved, but yeah, things are not completely straightforward, but the entry point is very easy and low, and we have the apparatus already working on the side of the stream. So, community partnership, I think would be great. But yeah, I'd like to see some of the earth science department sort of wrap their arms around some of the problems.
Yeah, I'd like to add that climate change has made the invasive problem ever greater. And so the invasives are just moving at almost at geometric proportions. So ideally, we'd be removing those invasives mechanically. But there just aren't enough people to do that. So it does behoove this scientific world to come up with better way of removing better chemicals, safer chemicals to try to kill them.
Yeah, to speak to the chemicals, there's certainly people on faculty that do know the answer to those questions. If there was, more vibrant community around the park in Homewood, and those people would be connected, and you would know who they were, and they can answer those questions for you. I'm sure that the people know of them.
I can almost imagine, there is the Friends of Stony Run website, which actually students in the class have helped set up. Like I can almost imagine a kind of like forum there where you could have maybe encourage experts like to be available for different kinds of questions. So that'd be one. I was just
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, sorry.
Maybe go a little bit more into, at some point you showed a slide that you saw the destruction by biohabitat. If you elaborate on that a little bit more, because I know the construction was very disruptive. It closed the stream for a very long time, but it after it was done, it made it more accessible for people, because before that it was overgrown and you couldn't get into the stream.
Oh, from this side.
Yeah, and so I just want to clarify, were you critiquing biohabitat or as a project?
Well, they biohabitats didn't do the work. The city couldn't afford to have them do the design build. They bid it out and they didn't win the bid, went to a lower cost bidder. And that trail, that access road actually was ad hoc. Their initially designed access was not passable. So they made this new access. I was in conversation with the former groundskeeper, and he didn't seem to be very involved with this. would go with, speak to what Sandy said earlier, I think it's still viewed as their backyard, and there was precious little involvement from Hopkins in any of the work there. So maybe, it might have been a happy accident that there's now a path there, but it was not adequately revegetated, and wouldn't have been, had not been for our efforts. It would have been left to been succumb to invasives. And it still might,
Yeah, also, I'd like to add that having been involved with the Stony Run from the days of the Jones Falls Watershed Association, which I formed with Michael Beer, who was a very well-known microphysicist here. And the whole thinking about stream restoration has so evolved over time. The things that they did 20 years ago, they wouldn't even think about doing now, because in many cases, those failed. So they come up with newer strategies. So we are benefiting from the fact that the lower Stony Run came after the upper Stony Run, as far as the city working on the stream restoration and the Roland Park area particularly. So, but they had this project that they just finished was a redo of a failed project. So we're on this, I don't know, hopefully progressively better solutions.
Yeah, the section, yeah, and I guess I maybe come at it a little differently. I don't think of it necessarily as destruction. I think there are things that could have been done better, but that stream restoration was necessary for improved water conveyance. Is that where Anand showed that video at the beginning with the rushing water going into the culvert?
I said disturbance, I didn't say destruction.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay. So at that area, when there was a heavy storm in April of like 2017 or so, that water is about 60 feet deep. It was when you were on the upper path on top of the hillside, the water is still 12 feet higher than your head because of all the debris jam that was built up at that culvert. So the stream restoration cleared that up, but also provided an access so that maintenance vehicles could get down there and keep that debris from clogging that culvert.
Which is proving to be a happy coincidence, because the city needs continuing access to be able to remove logs, etc., that block the culvert. And so they're gonna have to have the pathway is gonna have to be road ready, but not some, highway. And it also is gonna need to be, have some bit of switchback, because it's such a steep entry point. It would never make it as a walking path.
Question, you had the comments about, student involvement. Is there any consideration to make having dedicated projects as part of the 2 President's Day of Service being dedicated as a significant project for doing the Stony Run? As a formally dedicated project, we're going to take this much Stony Run area and we're going to work. We need X number of students to work on this. Has there been any thought of that?
Well, over the past year, we've had several President's Day of Service projects in the Stony Run.
Right.
Clearing invasives, stream cleanup and so forth. But I think you bring up a good point, because this, with the plan in place now, one of the things we have at the end of the plan is an implementation strategy where I've got all the partners for projects. So we could take some of those projects and make a more intentional effort with the President's Day of Service, and maybe get much larger groups that we've had in the past and say, this is going to
Because that's something that it says it's something that's done twice a year.
Yeah, and we've participated every time.
We've never missed the President's
They've
Day.
Make sure that
biggest-
it's more intentional that's what it is, because I wasn't aware that you there was a significant project, make it a significant project, not just a minor.
Super.
I'm from Urban Planetary Science Department, so if you want to talk to me about some connections and specific projects, that we have to do class on the department.
Oh, that would be great. Could you send your information to James and then?
Yeah, James is the.
That'd be a point, and then we could. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that would be great.
So we need, and we do, and we really, all these years have depended very heavily on Hopkins students to do heavy lifting